"You're not a pilot anymore, ma'am. You're just here to sign papers." That's what they told her. They didn't bring her back to fly. They brought her back to sign off on a forgotten relic. No one at the base knew she once flew that very jet through fire and storms, or that the scars on his fuselage matched the ones on her heart. They told her it was done. They told her she was done. But when the distress call came, and every aircraft was grounded, every pilot silent, she didn't wait for permission. She crossed the tarmac alone, climbed into the A-10 no one believed in, and brought it back to life. And as its engines screamed against the desert wind, entire careers, reputations, and assumptions were about to go up in smoke. Evelyn McCall had once been the kind of pilot they wrote training manuals about. She could land an A-10 with one engine, a shredded wing, and a blown hydraulic line, and she had, more than once. There was a time when flight crews across desert airfields would nod when she walked past, not out of courtesy, but out of earned respect. She wasn't flashy, wasn't loud, but when radios went dead and the sky turned hostile, her call sign was the one they waited for. She remembered one landing in particular, a storm over Kandahar visibility, near zero flares malfunctioning. Her bird had taken shrapnel through the left engine and was bleeding oil faster than they could pump it. She'd switched to manual, cranked the flaps by hand, and brought it in on fumes. The medics she carried in the back didn't know they were seconds from crashing. Evelyn never told them. She just walked off the tarmac with oil on her boots and a quiet nod to the ground chief. Mission done. But war doesn't remember you forever. Her last deployment ended with a transfer slip and a tight smile from a commander half her age. Budget cuts, they called it. Shifting priorities. A new generation of digital flyboys were replacing analog instincts like hers. The brass didn't say she was too old, but the silence said it for them. She signed the paperwork in a windowless office, handed over her wings, and boarded a flight home with nothing but a duffel bag and two faded notebooks, her logbooks. No parade, no ceremony. Just a seat near the back and a bitter cup of coffee. Civilian life was quieter than she'd imagined and lonelier. She bought a small house on the edge of a New Mexico town where the wind spoke more often than the neighbors. She taught one semester at a community college, but the students didn't care much for Cold War-era tactics or her stories about dodging SAMs in a valley she couldn't pronounce anymore. So she stopped teaching. She spent mornings walking the dry trails behind her house and evenings listening to old mission audio she'd converted to digital files, not because she missed the war, but because the war had remembered her, even if no one else did. Then one Monday the letter came. It was printed on military stock, the kind you don't throw away without at least reading. The seal on the envelope was still sharp, still official. "We request your technical expertise for the decommissioning process of airframe assets at Fort Quintero. Report no later than 0800 14th of next month. No fanfare, no apology." But it named a specific aircraft, tail number 706, her Warthog, and suddenly Evelyn McCall had a reason to pack her bag again. Not to fly, not yet, but something deep in her bones stirred. Something that hadn't moved in years. The first thing Evelyn noticed when she stepped onto Fort Quintero was the noise. Not the engines or the radio traffic, those were familiar, almost comforting, but the voices, young, loud, confident in the way only inexperience can be. The base had changed, or maybe it was the people. Either way, it wasn't hers anymore. She wore her old boots, regulations still polished, still tight across the arch. But around her were sneakers, wireless headsets, and aviator sunglasses worn for style, not sun. The new generation had arrived, simulators in their muscle memory doctrine, in their blood. They flew drones like video games and spoke in acronyms even she didn't recognize. No one saluted her when she passed. Why would they? Her name wasn't on the flight roster. Her wings were tucked under a borrowed field jacket with a visitor's badge clipped to the front like a punchline. To them, she was the temp mechanic, the one command brought in to check inventory during the fiscal downsizing. A formality. An old hand with grease under her fingernails and no relevance to offer. They didn't ask questions and she didn't give answers. At first, she didn't mind. She wasn't here to relive glory days. She was here for one reason: tail number 706. The Warthog sat behind a double chain-link fence at the edge of the yard, a place where aircraft went to be forgotten before the trucks came to haul their bones to Arizona, or overseas museums. Her first day, she walked straight to it, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning each line of paint like it was scripture. Dust caked the intake vents. The canopy was bolted shut. A red tag hung from the gear lever, fluttering in the wind like a half-raised flag. No one else looked twice. The second day, she asked for access. Command says she's marked for teardown, a young tech replied. He had perfect teeth and the swagger of someone who had never seen smoke inside a cockpit. No point going in. Besides, parts are already spoken for. Evelyn nodded. Didn't argue. But she came back anyway. Each morning before roll call, before the first squadron briefing, she made her rounds slow, methodical, like a priest walking a ruined chapel. She'd check the seams around the flaps, tap the housing under the fuselage with two knuckles. Listen for the echoes only she could interpret. They thought she was wasting time. Some joked about Granny Warthog. Others whispered that she might have flown once a long time ago. None of them bothered to ask, and Evelyn never corrected them, because she wasn't there for their respect. She was there to listen not to them, but to the jet, and it spoke to her. Every chipped panel, every soot-stained vent, every faded decal that had once shimmered under the Afghan sun. It was all still there. Beneath the dust, the silence, the bureaucracy, there was still a warrior underneath. Sometimes she'd stand beside it as the newer birds took off, polished F-35s shrieking into the sky like silver ghosts. The others watched them with admiration. Evelyn watched with detachment. She didn't begrudge the future, but she remembered the past. And that jet, that old Warthog, remembered too. One evening, as she stood with her hand resting on its side, a young lieutenant walked by and called out over his shoulder, "You really think that thing's worth saving?" She didn't even look up. "Depends who's flying," she said. Then she turned back to the jet, and the young man kept walking, unaware that the quiet woman in boots older than his career had once flown through storms that would have broken him. She didn't need a flight suit to prove it, and the Warthog, it was waiting. It started with silence, the kind of silence that made command nervous. One moment, a routine recon patrol was checking in over the mountains near the Colorado border, a test operation part of a joint exercise involving 2 surveillance drones and a 4-man ground team. Nothing dangerous. Nothing worth briefing. Then the comms went dead. No warning. No distress code. Just a long, dragging absence where voices used to be. By protocol, command waited. Storms in the region were common. Equipment failures even more so. When 30 minutes passed, they pinged the backup drone. It returned static. The last known coordinates were rugged terrain, sharp ridgelines, dense pine forest, and deep ravines with only one serviceable road in or out. Still no panic. Just a minor delay. Until the drone feed blinked once, stuttered, and died. That was when the tone shifted. You could hear it in the radio room, the tightening of breath behind every transmission, the clipped sentences, the way even the junior officers stopped talking. Command ran through the checklist. No chopper units were prepped. The 2 nearest Black Hawks were undergoing engine work, fuel lines half stripped. One medevac bird was on an unrelated transport mission. It would take hours to reroute. The colonel made the call. Stand down. Wait for support. Official. Cold. Calculated. In the hangar, Evelyn was crouched beneath tail number 706, inspecting a pressure seal she knew by touch, alone. The air buzzed with quiet chatter from a nearby radio, a low-volume stream of bass comms. Then something strange happened. A flicker. One brief pulse on a frequency no one used anymore, a channel once designated for emergency cross-squadron alerts. It had been disabled on most modern gear, but Evelyn had wired it into her handheld set long ago just in case. Now her earpiece crackled. It wasn't clear. Just a few words. Fragmented. Choked by wind and interference. Oh, hostile. 2 down. No visual. Trapped in static. Repeat. Pinned. No cover. Anyone. Then silence again. She stood slowly, heart pounding, not with panic, but with clarity. She turned to look across the flight line. Not one aircraft moving, not one pilot gearing up. The tower windows reflected the late sun like mirrors over a sleeping field. No one else had heard it, but Evelyn had. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just walked calmly, purposefully toward the Warthog. Because something deep inside her, the same instinct that once landed a wounded bird under fire, had already made the decision. Someone was out there, alone, bleeding, and waiting for help that wasn't coming, unless she brought it. She didn't ask. She didn't fill out a request form or notify command. No protocol, no briefing. She simply walked. The sun was starting to drop behind the western hills, casting long shadows across the empty tarmac. Most of the flight crews were at chow, or still staring at screens waiting for orders that weren't coming. The base had settled into that strange early evening quiet when the heat had begun to bleed from the concrete, but no one had quite gone home yet. Evelyn stepped out from the side hangar, her boots striking the pavement in a rhythm that was slow, steady, and final. Her field jacket flapped in the wind behind her, revealing the faded flight suit underneath one she hadn't worn in years, but still fit like memory. No one noticed at first. To them, she was just the older tech lady probably headed to maintenance or back to her bunk. But then someone in the tower caught her silhouette crossing toward the boneyard fence and leaned forward. Who is that?" came a voice over the internal comms. No one answered, because by then Evelyn had already reached the gate. The lock was simple, a standard pad with rust around the shank. She took a key from her pocket, not issued, not logged, just one she'd kept from years ago. One of those things she was never supposed to take, and no one had ever asked about. It clicked open like it was waiting for her. She approached tail number 706 like a veteran kneeling at a gravestone, calm, certain, without a trace of hesitation. The metal ladder groaned under her weight as she climbed. She didn't look back, didn't check if anyone was watching. None of it mattered. She opened the canopy, slid inside, and closed it behind her, with the grace of someone who had done it thousands of times and the reverence of someone who never thought she'd get to do it again. Her fingers moved without thought. Switches flipped, dials turned. Her boots rested lightly on the rudder pedals. She moved through the pre-start sequence like it was still 2007, and her mission briefing had just finished. At first, the cockpit was silent, the heavy, almost sacred silence of a machine long asleep. Then came the whine, low and rough like a throat clearing after years of disuse. The fuel pump clicked on. Warning lights blinked red and yellow across the console. One system after another sprang back to life, slow but stubborn, like an old warhorse stretching its legs after too long in the dark. The A-10's engines began to spool, coughing once, then catching. The sound rose into a growl, then a scream. It wasn't just noise. It was a memory brought back into motion. Outside, tech crews dropped wrenches. A siren blared. The tower lit up with voices. "Unknown power-up on pad 6. Who's in the Warthog? That's a grounded bird. Shut it down now." But inside the cockpit, Evelyn sat with her eyes forward, hands resting on the stick like it had never left her palms. She didn't flinch when the radio barked her name. Didn't pause when a jeep sped onto the tarmac below. She just toggled the flaps, throttled the engines, and watched as the horizon began to blur with heat. For the first time in years, she felt weightless, not in the air, but in purpose. Because the Warthog wasn't just waking up. It was answering a call no one else had the guts to hear. She was airborne before they could stop her. The wheels lifted from the scorched tarmac like a ghost rising from its grave. No call sign, no flight plan, no clearance. Just wind steel and a woman who had nothing to prove and everything to remember. The Warthog bucked as it climbed its systems, groaning beneath her. Years of neglect showed one engine coughed on throttle and half the HUD flickered with static. But Evelyn didn't need a perfect machine. She needed instinct. The sky over the Colorado border was darkening, not with clouds, but with smoke. Thin black tendrils curled over the mountain ridge like a warning. The coordinates from the broken signal earlier looped in her mind. She didn't need satellite intel. She could feel where they were. The terrain rushed below her. Sharp ridges, narrow canyons, places where even experienced pilots hesitated. But Evelyn had flown worse in war zones with no maps and only seconds between life and flame. She dropped low, so low the treetops blurred beneath her. The Warthog skimmed the surface like a hunting hawk, its shadow chasing her across the valley. Then she saw them. Smoke, wreckage, movement. A flipped recon vehicle burned near the base of a rock wall. Just ahead, a convoy of unmarked enemy trucks, surrounding a rocky outcrop where American soldiers had taken cover. She caught glimpses of bodies' heat signatures, ducking behind rocks trying not to be seen or killed. And the trucks were closing in. No air cover, no backup. Just her. Evelyn pulled hard to the left banking, sharp enough to make the frame rattle. The Warthog's cannon armament was limited, only partially loaded, before it was tagged for scrap. Half the ordnance systems were locked behind outdated protocols she didn't have time to bypass. So she chose her targets carefully. She lined up the first truck, a makeshift technical, with a mounted gun aimed toward the outcrop. Her fingers squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared with a sound that shook the sky. A heartbeat later, the truck exploded in a blossom of fire and debris. The rest of the convoy scattered like insects, unsure where the attack was coming from. She didn't give them time to figure it out. Evelyn dropped into a dive so steep it would have made a flight surgeon sweat. Her targeting systems barely worked, but she didn't need them. She flew by feel, by weight, by memory. She hit a second truck, dead center, then veered hard to avoid a rising missile, no countermeasures left. It screamed past her wingtip. Her eyes never blinked. The Warthog coughed again. Warning lights flashed red across her display. The fuel line to engine 2 was showing pressure loss. She didn't care. She wasn't flying for the return trip. She pulled into another loop, fired short bursts to push back advancing infantry, then swooped low enough to rattle helmets on the ground. One of the trapped recon soldiers looked up and raised a hand, not in panic but in awe. Someone shouted into the field mic, "Who the hell is flying that thing?" No answer, just another roll, another pass, another flash of cannon fire splitting the dusk. Evelyn made one final run, tight, controlled, brutal, and leveled the hillside. The last of the enemy trucks turned and fled. Silence fell. Not because the battle was over, but because the enemy had realized they weren't just outgunned, they were outflown. And the sky now belonged to a woman they had long forgotten. The Warthog limped back toward base under a bleeding sky. One engine was gone, shut down mid-flight after the last strafing run. The other coughed and surged with uneven thrust, pulling her slightly off-center every few seconds. The left landing gear had taken shrapnel on ascent. Evelyn knew it might not hold. The cockpit smelled of burned wiring and sweat. Warning lights still blinked like stubborn embers refusing to go out. The whole frame groaned with every adjustment, not in protest, but like it was holding on just for her. As the base appeared on the horizon, she keyed into the tower, calm as ever. "Quintero Tower, this is Warthog 706. I'm coming in hot. No flaps, no left gear, no time for discussion." A long silence. Then the radio cracked. "You're not cleared for landing. Repeat, you are not." She shut it off. After the tower scrambled. Ground crews ran. Command staff stared at the radar like it had betrayed them. And out on the far end of the tarmac, soldiers and techs emerged from hangars, drawn by the distant growl of a single angry jet. No formation, no escort. Just one battered, smoking aircraft, gliding in low, skimming the perimeter, like a hawk coming home with torn wings. She lined up the runway, heart steady, mind sharp. The gear warning screamed. The HUD flickered. She could feel the left side sagging, ready to collapse. She didn't fight it. She rode it down like a wounded stallion, leaning with it, guiding the descent by feel alone. The Warthog kissed the tarmac, bounced once, then dragged hard left. The left gear gave out. Sparks erupted as the wings scraped the concrete. Metal shrieked. The aircraft skidded sideways, tearing a long scar into the runway, until it finally stopped groaning, steaming alive, just barely. Silence. No one moved. The canopy opened with a hiss. Evelyn climbed out slowly, boots crunching against scorched paint and dust. Her flight suit was streaked with grime hair, stuck to her face, hands trembling, not from fear but from adrenaline, finally draining. At the edge of the runway, the base commander approached at a fast, angry pace, flanked by two officers. His face was red, uniform half-buttoned, fury barely contained. He stopped 3 feet from her, voice rising. "You had no clearance. You hijacked a grounded jet and violated a dozen regulations." Evelyn didn't flinch. She stared him dead in the eye and said just one thing. "But I brought them back." Behind her, a military Humvee pulled up. 4 soldiers stepped out, dusty, bruised, bloodied, but walking. One was helped by medics. Another turned to look at Evelyn, then saluted wordless. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. Mechanics, pilots, officers who'd mocked her. They all stood frozen as the pieces fell into place. The old jet, the older woman, the impossible mission. She didn't argue, didn't explain. She handed the commander her helmet and turned away, walking past him like he wasn't even there. Because she had nothing left to prove, and everything she needed was already behind her 6 soldiers who were breathing because she had said yes when everyone else waited for permission. And for the first time in years, Evelyn McCall wasn't a memory. She was a reckoning. No one expected the footage to go viral. But one of the recon soldiers, bleeding and pinned behind shattered rock, had done the unthinkable. He turned on his encrypted helmet cam and streamed the sky. The footage was grainy, shaky, but it didn't need clarity. It had everything else: the shriek of the A-10 diving between cliffs, the unmistakable roar of its cannon, the thunder as enemy vehicles exploded one after another, and just barely the silhouette of a lone jet carving circles in the sky like a ghost refusing to vanish. Within hours of returning to base, the soldier stream had leaked onto a secure veteran forum. Within another day, it was everywhere. No call sign, no orders, just action. They didn't know her name, not yet, but they were already calling her the Ghost of Quintero. At the Pentagon, alarms didn't ring, they whispered. Questions started with a murmur, then escalated. Who authorized the flight? Where did she get the bird? Why was that aircraft operational? Who grounded her and why? What began as confusion quickly turned to quiet outrage, not at Evelyn, at those who had buried her. 4 senior officers, including the base commander, were placed under review by week's end. 2 were suspended from duty pending investigation. 1 resigned before the hearings began. The 4th claimed ignorance, only to be shown email logs with his signature. Meanwhile, a plain envelope arrived at Evelyn's quarters. Report to Washington, 0700, dress uniform. There was no red carpet at the Pentagon, no interviews, no press. But when Evelyn stepped into the hall in full uniform, the one they told her she'd never wear again, something happened that hadn't happened in years. Every officer in the room stood, not because someone told them to, not out of formality. They stood because they knew. Because every single one of them, no matter how many stripes or stars they wore, had seen the footage. They knew what it took to fly through mountains without radar. They knew what it meant to defy protocol when lives were on the line. And most of all, they knew what it felt like to be written off and still answer the call. The Secretary of the Air Force stepped forward. A small case was opened. Inside, a distinguished flying cross polished to perfection. She didn't cry, didn't smile. She just nodded once as it was pinned above her heart, just over the patch they once laughed at in the briefing room. Then she turned to leave. She wasn't there for the honor. She was there because someone finally remembered what she was made of. Back at Fort Quintero, her old Warthog had been towed into the largest hangar. Nobody dared touch it. It sat there, dented, scorched, glorious, with a spray-painted inscription on its fuselage that someone had scrawled in white stencil, retired by command. Resurrected by courage. And Evelyn. She never bragged, never corrected those who still called her ma'am without knowing why. But every time a young pilot passed her in the corridor and offered a sharp salute, she returned it simple and steady. Because some medals come with ribbons, but others come with silent steel. In the sound of a forgotten jet refusing to stay grounded. They thought she'd choose the sky again, after the medal, after the investigation that rattled the command structure, after every pilot on Fort Quintero had looked at her with a new kind of respect. They assumed Evelyn McCall would return to the cockpit. And she could have. A decorated veteran, a hero, the woman who brought 6 soldiers home in a jet held together by memory and instinct. She could have had her pick of stations. Even a brand new F-35 in a pristine hangar was within reach. But Evelyn just shook her head and smiled faintly. I didn't come back to prove I can still fly. I came back because no one's teaching these kids how to survive when everything falls apart. So they gave her a different seat. Tactical simulation instructor, a small windowless classroom behind one of the older administrative buildings. 4 training simulators lined up in a row, paint peeling on the walls, whiteboards stained from years of dry erase markers. But Evelyn didn't need polish. She needed time. She needed silence. She needed a new generation of pilots still smelling of theory and untouched by fire. At first they called her ma'am with stiff politeness. Some looked at her like a living relic. Others whispered behind her back. She's the one who got grounded, right? She heard it all. But she didn't flinch. She didn't correct them. She didn't need to. She simply walked to the simulator, typed in a mountain terrain map and said, "This is the canyon I flew through with one engine and no radar. You're going in. Whoever makes it out stays." Everyone else reset. On day one, no one made it out. But slowly something began to shift. Every time a student panicked, every time a screen glitched, every time someone shouted, "I lost the target," or "I'm out of control," a calm voice would cut through the noise. Her voice: "Drop altitude. Trust the tilt of the airframe. Don't fight, guide it. Don't fire yet. They want you to turn your back. Keep your sight line steady. If no one else is answering, be the one who does." Somewhere along the way, they started calling her Echo. At first it was a joke. Then it became something more. Echo because in every moment of silence, she was the voice that answered. Echo because when the radar failed and the mission fell apart, she was still there. One evening near the end of a training cycle, a young cadet asked her gently, "Ms. McCall, do you ever regret not going back up there?" She paused, then looked at the simulator, the jet on screen frozen mid-dive, and smiled. "I never left the sky. I just changed seats." The hangar was quiet that night. Most of the base had gone to sleep. The air was cool, still humming softly with the distant whine of lights overhead. Outside, the wind moved gently across the tarmac, like it too was winding down after a long tour. But inside Hangar 6, beneath a pair of aging overhead fluorescents, stood the Warthog, tail number 706. The scars on her body hadn't been repainted. No one had dared. The cracked panels, the charred streak along the wing, the bent rivets on her undercarriage, they were left untouched. A war memorial in steel, a ghost that refused to fade. And there, standing before her, Evelyn McCall. She wasn't in uniform, just boots, a gray jacket, and her old ball cap, the one she'd worn on missions back when no one had ever questioned if she belonged in the sky. Her hand rested gently on the side of the jet, fingers splayed across the cool metal, like she was checking for breath, for memory, for heartbeat. The words were still there, scrawled in thick white stencil across the wing, retired by command. Resurrected by courage. She hadn't written it, but someone had. Someone who understood. Evelyn smiled, not with pride, with something deeper, something softer. She leaned her forehead gently against the fuselage, closed her eyes, and whispered, "You weren't done." She paused, then added, barely audible, "Neither was I." A gust of wind pushed through the cracked side door, lifting a swirl of dust that danced through the beam of a hanging light. It caught in her hair and her breath. She didn't move. For a moment, it was just her and the machine, two relics written off, two warriors who had outlasted expectations, who had burned too hot to be quietly extinguished. There was no audience, no medals, no radio calls, just silence. And in that silence, Evelyn found peace, not because she had been recognized, but because she had proven something to herself, that when the world says you're finished, you don't answer with words, you answer with action. She stepped back, gave the Warthog one last look, then turned toward the darkened runway. Above, a single jet roared through the sky, one of her students, no doubt. Maybe flying through the same simulated canyon she once conquered for real. She watched its lights disappear into the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled. We live in a time where experience is too often replaced by speed, and wisdom gets buried beneath convenience. Evelyn McCall's story reminds us that some things and some people aren't outdated. They're just waiting for the moment they're needed again. She didn't step back into the sky for glory. She didn't fight to be noticed. She acted because someone had to, and because when everyone else stayed silent, she refused to let courage go unheard. How many people like Evelyn walk among us today, veterans, retirees, elders, parents, men and women with hands worn from service and sacrifice, quietly sidelined by a world obsessed with what's next while forgetting who built what we stand on. Maybe you've known an Evelyn. Maybe you've been one. That moment when no one called your name but you stood up anyway. That time you acted not because it was easy but because it was right. So tell us, who's your Evelyn? Who's the person you know that still has fight left in them even when the world says they're done? Leave a comment below and share their story or your own. We want to read them. We need to remember them. And if Evelyn's journey meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your family's legacy, or the people you still carry in your heart, then please give this video a like, subscribe for more stories like this, and share it with someone who might need a little reminder today. That retired doesn't mean forgotten, and sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that whispers back when no one else does. Thank you for spending your time with us. We're honored to share these stories with you.